Welcome to the overview of Module 2, focusing on preparing for relationship selling. First, we will start with a brief introduction. Then we will identify the chapters involved in this module. From there, we will look at the key learning objectives. And we will summarize some of the key or salient highlights of this module. We will conclude with readings, assignments, and assessments that are related to this particular module. In Module 2, we will see that the key to any successful buyer-seller relationship is trust. And the essence of building trust is being knowledgeable about the customer. Understanding their business, understanding their industry, understanding what keeps them up at night, understanding how we can help them gain competitive advantage is crucial to building that trust factor. And as salespeople, we need to focus on building a knowledge base about our customers. Today, customers are looking for sales professionals who can be their trusted advisors and consultants, not time wasters. Part of Module 2 explores the types of knowledge that salespeople are expected to have as they begin their sales jobs. So essentially, it's important that we, as I said before, understand the customer's business. What industry are they in? What are the competitive pressures in that industry? What are they trying to accomplish? What are some of the other factors that impact their industry, like the economy, like government regulation, like social demographic factors? All of these things help us build a picture of the customer and who they are. Other areas of knowledge that we need to build are building communication skills. In other words, how do we connect with the customer? How important is it that we understand the different communication styles that customers have so that we can position our message to connect well with them? Other areas of knowledge include, quite obviously, understanding fully our own product offering, prices, distribution, promotions. All of that area is extremely important. In addition, it's important to remain competent in the many ways, the many technologies that are out there that can help us do our job, be they customer relationship management tools, use of applications that help us manage customer data, customer information. All of these things help us be more successful in our job in delivering service to the customer. The chapters covered in Module 2 are as follows. We start with Chapter 3, which deals with the psychology of selling. You know, a question I often ask my salespeople are you selling what the customer is buying? Now that may sound like a kind of a superficial question, but just think of it. A lot of times as salespeople, we're focused on our product, what we have to offer. We're focused on features. The customer is focused on another area, what's in it for them. In other words, they're focused on the benefits to them. So it's important as salespeople that we understand fully what the customer needs, because by understanding that, then we understand what's important to them and what they see as a benefit. Because ultimately, benefits are determined by the customer, not by the seller. So in understanding that, then we have a true idea of what they're buying, i.e. benefits, and why they're buying. So Chapter 3 is very much focused in those areas. Chapter 4 deals with communication for successful selling. So it breaks down the communication process, some of the potential barriers to effective communication. It also focuses on the fact that all of us as individuals have different communication styles. There's no good style or bad style, they're just different. And so your style may be different from mine as to someone else. So it's important to understand what our style is and then what their style is so that we can adapt our messaging, adapt our delivery to connect better with our audience. This element is crucial to successful selling because you can have the best product in the world, but if you don't know how to communicate it, if you are coming across as too direct or too forceful, or not direct enough and too wishy-washy, either of them can get us into trouble, even though our product may be fantastic. So it's not just what we say, but it's how we say it that's extremely important. In chapter 5, we get into sales knowledge. In other words, the areas of knowledge that we need to build up to be conversant with our customers, to really be their advisors, their consultants. At the end of the day, customers are not interested in buying simply a product. They're interested in buying a solution, something that will solve their particular problem. And to do that, we need to fully understand the customer's situation. What's keeping them up at night? What are some of the issues that are impacting their business? What are some of the challenges that they're facing? Can we help relieve some of these challenges and address them? What are some of the opportunities they may have in front of them? And can we help them seize on those? We can't do this if we really don't understand them as a business. Their business, their industry, their situation is extremely important. And only then does it make sense for us to be able to position our solution as something that can help them achieve their goals and objectives. So some of the key learning objectives in Module 2 are as follows. If we look first at Chapter 3, remember Chapter 3 deals with the psychology of selling. So some of the key learning objectives in that area is that we're going to explain buying behavior and the influence of psychological factors on it. We're also going to recognize the differences between consumer and business or organizational buying and identify important buying needs. We're also going to look at classifying various buying situations and describe the organizational buying decision process. And we're going to see that this organizational buying process or business buying is much more complex than what we would see in a consumer environment. Because usually we're dealing with more people, more influences, there's more levels of approval and review that need to be done. We're often talking much major purchases that are strategic to a business, which generally make the selling cycle much longer and more complex than your typical consumer scenario. One of the other learning objectives of this chapter is we're going to recognize the importance of social style theory and how it applies to relationships. So we're going to examine the different social styles and essentially how to manage and how to deal with them in a way that improves our effectiveness with the customer. We're also going to examine the various ways to deal with difficult customers and recognize why satisfied customers are easier to sell. In Chapter 4, which deals more with the communication process, we're going to describe that process. Another learning objective of Chapter 4 is to define and demonstrate the importance of recognizing and using different types of non-verbal communication when selling. When you think of it, psychologist Albert Mehrabian once published a major work in which he identified that as much as 85% of communication is via non-verbal means. In other words, there's far more ways in which we communicate about ourselves through what someone sees versus what they hear. Think of it. There's body language, there's mannerisms, there's inflection of our voice, there's facial expressions, there's how we're dressed, there's so many more ways, and all of this is non-verbal communication. And what we'll see is that it's important that we understand this, we understand how to manage them, so that our non-verbal communication will be consistent and support our verbal communication, which is our words, what we're actually saying. Another area of learning objectives in Chapter 4 is to recognize the potential barriers to communication. And there are many. Some of them are pretty obvious. Some of them are not. Some barriers to communication that are obvious are usually physical ones, like noise distractions. If somebody was walking behind me, as I'm speaking, that could be a distraction. That's a physical distraction. Just think of a presentation you've been in a conference room where somebody comes in late or knocks on the door, or the secretary, has a message for the speaker, or you can see things through the window or the parking lot of people going. All of these are physical distractions that can take away from, the effectiveness of the messaging, and things that the presenter needs to be aware of and control. But there's also more subtle barriers to communication. Biases, prejudices, people's past experience with your product or service. All of these can taint or influence their impression of your product or service in a much more subtle way. So these are all areas that we will need to look at and address through Chapter 4. Other areas of learning objectives in Chapter 4 are to recognize the importance of empathy and listening to communication. In fact, one of the most vital skills to selling success, and I can't emphasize this enough, and we'll see it as we go through Chapter 4, is listening skills. Listening skills is the most crucial skill a salesperson can have. There's a saying, God gave us, one mouth and two ears, so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. And when you think of it, the most effective presenters are the ones that first seek to understand, so that then they earn the right to be understood. And when you think of what that means, is we first, we might ask some questions, and then we listen to what the customer is telling us. We don't interrupt. We don't think about what we're going to say before we fully listen to what the customer is saying. And not only listen, but look as though we're listening. And that sends the customer a message that we're really engaged and we're really interested in what they're saying. And only after we fully listened to what the customer is saying have we earned the right then to speak. In other words, for us now to be understood in terms of our feedback to that information. So these types of things, this level of listening in which we listen carefully, we don't interrupt, but we also listen with our eyes and we listen with our ears. In other words, we listen with our ears because we're going to hear the words that are being said. Those are important. But we're also going to listen with our eyes. We're going to look at the body language. We're going to look at the facial expressions. We're going to look at the mannerisms that they have. We're going to look at their posturing. All of these give us an indication in their mind of what they're thinking. And we're going to look for inconsistencies. Is their body language at odds with what they're saying? If so, that's an inconsistency. It's a red flag. So all of these things will help us become better communicators as we understand how we communicate. Empathy is an important part of communication. Empathy basically says, I understand where you're coming from. It's okay to feel the way you are feeling. And sometimes a customer's upset. They could be upset with us. They could be upset with our product. They could be upset with a past experience. Who knows? But it's important for us as salespeople to empathize with that. That doesn't mean we have to agree with everything that's being said, but we have to feel or make the customer feel that we're aligned with them emotionally. Hey, it's okay to feel that way. We understand where you're coming from. So all of these things are crucial to selling success because they really focus on not just what we say, but how we say it. We're going to discuss the different communication styles that people use. As we're going to see, there are 4 main communication styles: amiables, analytics, drivers, expressives, and each one of these will pose different challenges to us in terms of the pace of our presentation, what things they want emphasized in the presentation. Some people are more numbers oriented, some people are more big picture oriented. They're going to emphasize different things, and they're going to challenge us in different areas. If we don't understand that, we could be creating the wrong messaging to the wrong people. And we're also going to recognize the importance of verbal communication, because at the end of the day, the verbal part, what we present is, what gets left with the customer. So we're going to see that there are different modes of communication between, we can communicate verbally, as I'm communicating verbally to you over video, but we also can communicate verbally through the written word, like email or text or social media. And different things get emphasized in these different media. Written communication tends to be a little bit more formal, especially in email, not so much texting, but in email, it tends to be more formal. And so we write for a different purpose in those areas than we would with the spoken word. So those are all things that we will see as we go through chapter 4. So successful salespeople are knowledgeable individuals. They spend a lot of time and effort becoming experts in their field. And so the key learning objectives of Chapter 5 are as follows. We want to be able to explain the importance of knowledge to sales professionals and determine the various sources of knowledge. In other words, why is it so important for salespeople to be knowledgeable about their selling situation? And where do they acquire this knowledge? So that's going to be part of the Chapter 5 material. Also, one of the key learning objectives of this chapter is to discuss the general areas of knowledge needed to increase sales success. So what are the important things we need to know? We'll also want to understand the importance of features, advantages, and benefits, and develop a FAB, feature, advantage, benefit worksheet. And this is kind of the core to our solution, as it were. And you're going to see this FAB, or feature, advantage, benefit, come up a lot in not only Module 2, but in the subsequent modules as well. In fact, you're going to be putting one together in your sales call plan that leads to your sales presentation at the end of the year. And when you look at this area, it forms the core of what it is we offer the customers. To be able to put a good feature, advantage, benefit worksheet together, we need to fully understand what the customer needs. Because if we don't understand what the customer needs, then we don't really understand what they see as a benefit. And if we don't understand what they see as a benefit, then we don't understand what features to position and what advantages to position with those features. So you see how it's all a chain. We don't understand what the customer needs, then we can't understand what they see as value, i.e. benefits. And if we don't understand what they value, then we could be positioning features that they're not interested in and talking about advantages that really don't get their interest. So it's all a chain that works together. But once we understand how to put this together, understand their needs, understand what then they see as value, and therefore position our solutions, features, and advantages relative to those benefits, then it all flows together and we get the customer's interest and attention because they see us now as helping them, not us just flogging a product. We're also going to understand the concept of the unique selling proposition. And the unique selling proposition basically is a short, concise statement about our solution that basically addresses a key question in the customer's mind. And that is, why should I buy from you? What makes you different? Why should I go with you? And when you think of it, when you're a customer and you're talking to a sales rep and they're trying to sell you something, isn't that the question you have in your mind? Hey, there's so many cars out there, or there's so many dishwashers out there. Why should I go with your solution? Is it service? Is it reputation? Is it a good value? What is it? These are the key things that differentiate us from somebody else. And it's important for us to know what they are and how to put that together in a clear, concise statement, not something that takes 5 paragraphs to explain. It's got to be short and sweet. And we'll look at that in Chapter 5. And we'll also explain the main technologies used by salespeople. Remember, this chapter is about gathering information so that we can become knowledgeable about the customer's environment, the customer's situation. To do that, we got to be able to manage that information. We have to be able to gather it from various sources. And today, a lot of that is handled through various applications and technologies that we'll see. So let's look at some of the chapter highlights of Module 2. And I just want to stop here for a second and note that any highlights presented, whether it's for this module or any of the other modules, is not a substitute for reading the chapters. So you should read all the chapters that are assigned in this course. So if we look at Chapter 3, we see that salespeople need to be knowledgeable about factors that influence the buyer's purchase decision. And we know that knowledge improves self-confidence. Think of it. The more knowledgeable you are about a situation, let's say you've prepared for a test or an exam, the more confident you're going to feel that you're going to do well. The more you've prepared for a job interview, the more confident you're going to feel than if you just going in there trying to wing it, as it were. So knowledge builds self-confidence. It also builds trust in the other party. The customer senses a sales rep that is prepared. They can see it in the confidence that the sales rep exudes. You know, their voice, their mannerisms, their posture, their body language betrays an element of confidence. And customers like to buy from salespeople that they feel are successful and confident. So all of these things contribute to success. Since personal selling requires understanding of human behavior, each salesperson has to determine a prospective customer's motivations, perceptions, learning, attitudes, and personality. Think of all of these things as being ingredients that kind of go into the mix that really have a factor on the customer's, perception of your product or service. So a salesperson has to know how all these psychological factors might influence the buyer's needs. Another salient point of this chapter is that needs require a multifaceted approach to uncover. You can ask questions, you can observe the prospect's behavior, you can listen to them as they speak, you can review what they've bought in the past and how often their buying patterns. You can see who they're buying from now. You can talk to associates about their needs. All of these things are different facets, provide a different element of information that hopefully you can put together to get a pretty good understanding of what the customer might need. And when you think of it, there's all of these things kind of paint a particular element of the picture. I had a friend who was in the roofing business, and I asked him, well, how do you, uncover prospective customers, that they might need, your service? He says, well, one of the things we do a lot of things. Obviously, we do direct mail campaigns and, call outs and things like that to, flyers and things like that to solicit potential business. We ask customers who we currently have if they know someone else who might, need our services. We ask questions. But we also do a lot of driving around. We observe. If we're already in a neighborhood and we're doing a job and we see 3 or 4 more houses down the street that the roof shingles are curling, we can just see by observing, using our eyes, that these people have a need for our service. So sometimes the need is obvious. We can see that through observation. Now, not all products is that possible, but there's a situation where, the roofer was using a multifaceted approach. So people usually buy to satisfy a need, to fulfill a desire, and to obtain something that's of value to them. Established relationships strongly influence buying decisions. So when we look at things like patronage motives, what that means is that customers that buy from us, that have had a positive experience with us, are more likely to buy more from us or buy again from us because their experience has been good. Maybe we have provided good post-sale service, support, we follow up with them after the sale, we keep in touch. All of these things can help build what we call patronage buying motives, which are really loyalty buying motives. And it's much easier to sell to a customer that already buys from you and is satisfied than trying to sell to a new prospect. Salespeople should understand that the characteristics of the target market, whether it's consumer or organizational, and how these characteristics relate to the buyer's behavior to better sell and serve them. So when you think of it, if we understand, what makes our target market an attractive customer for us? What are the characteristics about them that attracted us to them and they in turn are attracted to us? If we understand fully what they are and are conscious of providing those deliverables to the customer on an ongoing basis, we're better up to sell to them and sell more to them as we go on. Another element of Chapter 3 is that not all buying situations are alike. In other words, not all customers have the same level of knowledge about what it is they need, their familiarity with the technology or the different brands out there. So we need to look at each situation in a different light. In other words, as a unique situation. In other words, there are going to be situations that we call that involve routine decision making. These are situations where customers, fully understand the technology, they understand the products, they understand the alternatives and the brands out there. So for them, it's more a matter of, reaching out to various suppliers and seeing if they can fulfill these particular requirements that they're looking for. So they're very specific on what they're looking for because they're very familiar with the technology and the products that are there. So here it's a matter of, can we fulfill the requirements? Are there an opportunity for us to maybe influence those requirements in some way? But basically the requirements are pretty clear. Another buying situation is what we call limited decision making buying situation. This is where the customer may be familiar with the technology, but not necessarily all of the different alternatives that are out there, the different brands. So they need some help on, understanding what are some of the different products out there that can help us do this. So there might be a situation where the customer is looking to update the laptops, the automation for their salespeople, and So they're familiar with laptops, they're familiar with mobile devices, but they're not so familiar with all the different offerings that a Dell computer versus an HP might have. So the focus here more is on what makes you different, what differentiates you from the other guy when it comes to laptops or PCs. And the third situation is kind of the most extensive. It's what we call the extensive decision-making situation. This is where a customer is not that familiar at all with the technology or the different alternatives and products that are out there. They know they have a problem, they know they want to address it, but they're not quite sure how to do it. And this is where the sales rep has the most influence on shaping ideas, shaping preferences, shaping purchase criteria. This might be a situation where the customer is going from a manual CRM or customer relationship management system where they're using, paper, and they're using files and folders to track customer data, and they want to go from that to something that's completely automated. And there's a lot of companies that provide a completely automated solution, like Salesforce.com that you might be familiar with. Also, there's other ones out there like Goldmine or SAP or Oracle. So here's a situation where the customer knows they want to go from manual to automated, but they don't know the technology, and they certainly don't know all the differences between Salesforce and Goldmine and SAP and Oracle. So that's where the customer is most influenceable and is most malleable in terms of their thinking. So in those situations, the selling cycle is obviously going to be longer and more complex, but there's the most opportunity for the sales rep to influence that decision. The following are module highlights of Chapter 4. Communication is the transmission of both verbal and nonverbal information and understanding between a sales rep and prospect. Most communication is nonverbal, and recognition of nonverbal communication is essential to sales today. Think of it. Depending on which textbook you read, which articles you study, most psychologists will tell you that communication in terms of nonverbal communication is the biggest element of the communication pie. It comprises anywhere from 60 to 85% of all communication, with verbal communication comprising the rest. Now, that doesn't mean that verbal communication is not important. It is extremely important. Our choice of words can convey an entirely different meaning if we're not careful. However, the reason why nonverbal communication is so important is for a few reasons. One is that there's so many more ways in which we can communicate nonverbally. My own hand gestures, facial expression, body language, positioning and angle of my body, my tone of voice, the rate at which I speak. All of these things convey meaning beyond words. And quite often, whenever there's a contradiction or a conflict between what somebody hears you say and what somebody sees you say, they'll believe what they see 9 times out of 10. So in other words, if I'm saying something, but my body language betrays nervousness, anxiety, shiftiness, whatever, the customer is going to sense that, and they're going to believe more what they see over what they hear. Nonverbal communication is a more older form of communication. When you think of it, language is relatively new to human evolution. We've been around a lot longer than when we actually developed language. So we had to develop these visual, nonverbal skills to communicate. They're more ingrained in us. Words are relatively recent. And that's another reason why we tend to be a little bit more honest with our nonverbal communication than we are with our verbal communication. Think of it. When you're anxious, you tend to be fidgety and you tend to sweat, or you tend to, be nervous. These things are hard to control. We might think we're controlling them sometimes, but they tend to tell a story beyond our own threshold of consciousness. And that's why it's important for us to understand this and see how the two need to work together for us to convey a consistent and compelling message. We don't want the two working at odds to each other. The communication process is an element that we're going to talk about in Chapter 4, and it's comprised of several key elements. It starts with a sender, which is really somebody who has something to say, which we also call the encoder. Think of it as me talking right now. I obviously got some ideas in my head, and I have something I want to convey to you. So I have to take those ideas, put them into words, so I can convey them to you, my audience. And then I embellish them with body language, my hand gestures, my vocal qualities. That's all part of the nonverbal that encompasses the verbal that I'm sending you. So my message is being conveyed to you through my words, through my actions, and you're receiving them at your end. So you are the receiver in this case, the other element of communication. And at your end, you're decoding the message. You are, in other words, interpreting through your filters, and each of you have different filters based on your own psychological, sociological, education, cultural background, your knowledge of the subject matter, familiarity with sales. Some of you are more, some of you are less. All of these elements create your own personal filter through which you will receive my message and will decode it, i.e., you will assign a meaning to what it is I'm saying. In other words, you will interpret my message. And each one of you might have a slightly different interpretation, even though you're all hearing exactly the same thing from me right now. My message to you is coming via a channel or medium. In this case, it's via an electronic medium, and you're seeing my video through this presentation. If I was face-to-face with you, it would be through the airwaves between you and I. That's the channel. It's the method by which the message is being communicated. If I was on television, it would be TV or radio, etc. Once you decode that message or assign meaning to it or interpret it, you then provide feedback to me. And what that means is that you are taking that message and you are responding to it in some way. And that could be through, if I were able to see you visually, I could see that through your facial expression, through your body language, through your, through your posture. But I could also hear it. You might, in other words, you might ask me a question about what you just heard. You might say, Cam, well, what did you mean by this last thing you just said? Or something to that effect. Or it could be just some comment about what I just said. That's what we call feedback, where the receiver has interpreted the message and is now providing a response to the sender, which in this case is me. And that response can be both verbal, hey Cam, what do you mean by this? Or I have a question about that. But it can also be nonverbal. And again, if I were able to see you, the nonverbal would be, I can see your body language, your expression, your facial expressions, your mannerisms. All of this process forms a loop, as it were. So it starts with me, the sender. I have something to say. I have to take that idea and put it into a package that I can deliver to you. In this case, I'm taking my ideas. I'm putting them in words and sentences. That's what we call encoding, creating a message. And I'm sending them to you via the airwaves, which is the channel medium. You at the other end are the decoder, the receiver of that message. And you're interpreting it through your own personal filters. And then you're providing me feedback, whether it's verbal or nonverbal. And this continues the loop. So because now, at your end, when you're providing feedback, you're now the sender of the message. And I now have to listen and view what you're saying. I'm now the receiver. And I have to respond to that and send my feedback to you. So you can see how communication is a constant loop in which we trade roles through this whole process. Now, there are situations in this whole process where the message can be distorted or distracted in some way. That's what we call noise. And noise are things that some we can control, some we cannot. Some elements of noise are physical, i.e., as I mentioned earlier in a previous slide, if I was talking and somebody was walking behind me, that would be a distraction. You might be more interested in the person behind me than what I'm saying. And so therefore, you're not really getting my message because that was a distraction. So that's a form of noise. That's a physical form where something happened that deviated attention in some way, which such that the receiver now either partially or did not fully interpret the message that the sender sent. If there were other things happening, like my phone was ringing constantly or something like that, that's another form of noise. Or if I'm getting a bad signal where my internet is constantly choppy and you're hearing every second or third word, that's a form of noise because it's impacting the delivery of that message such that you're not able to interpret it in the way that hopefully I intended. But there's also non-physical noise, again, as I talked about in a previous slide. And the non-physical noise are things that are more subtle. Biases, prejudices, past experiences. These also all color our interpretation of that message. If you had a bad experience with my company before or a previous sales rep, you might already be biased against me, even though I may have nothing to do with that experience. So already what I'm saying might be tainted or interpreted in a way that's detrimental to me because of that bias that you have. You're projecting that bad past experience as something that you think is going to continue through me. And so these are more subtle things that can happen. Think of a situation where you're in a meeting and a fellow colleague is there with his boss and other people and has something to say and maybe raises a point, and the boss says, "Oh, sit down. That's kind of off topic. That's not appropriate," or something like that. And just think how that employee might feel on something like that. They might have thought it was a good point, and the boss shot it down. So what do you think is going to happen in the next meeting? Well, in the next meeting, that same employee is going to think twice about raising their hand or raising a point, because they think what happened in the last meeting is going to happen again in this meeting. So they're going to project their past experience forward to the new experience. In other words, they're not going to raise their hand. So you can see how past experiences can influence also future behavior and future perceptions. Take the flip side of that. That same employee maybe has a different boss and raises their hand, raises a point in a meeting. And the boss in this case says, "Hey, that's a great point. Wow, I'm glad you came up with that. Guys, what do the rest of you think?" Now what do you think that employee is going to do? Well, that next meeting is going to be quite different for that employee. They're going to be much more apt to raise more input, to be much more contributing to that conversation. So these are just some examples where past experiences can influence our behavior and can influence our perceptions of people, and therefore color our interpretation of the message. So barriers have to be recognized, i.e. all these sources of noise have to be recognized and have to be contained and as much as possible eliminated. We can't eliminate all sources of distraction, but what we can do is recognize them, and when we recognize them, that's half the battle. We can then find ways in which we can contain and control them. Social media is a growing area of popularity amongst a lot of salespeople, and it's a great way to reach out to customers and also engage with them, find out more about them, find out things about their business and industry that may not be found in other sources. But it's also important that all of us, when we engage in social media, that we also make sure that we vet our own social media profile and make sure that it's always professional in nature. Because just like you're looking up that customer, let's say on LinkedIn, which is a professional social networking site, one of the most popular, that customer may also be searching out you and seeing what you're all about. They could be looking at your Facebook account. So think of it, your social media now forms a composite picture of who you are. So we need to be mindful of what message are we sending out there about ourselves. The following are module highlights of Chapter 5. Well, we've all seen how sales knowledge is vitally important in terms of building self-confidence and building trust with your customer. And this takes on several different forms. Certainly, you need to know your customers, their industry, their issues, the things that impact their business. But it's also important to know your own company. Understand your own company's history, its policies, procedures, your products, distribution channels, promotion and pricing strategies. All of these are extremely important as they help you project that image of being an expert. And customers like to deal with sales reps who are knowledgeable about their own company and its practices. Knowledge of the competition, the industry in general, the economy are also important to build trust and self-confidence. At the core of any prospect's interest in doing business with you is the basic question, why should I buy from you? So the unique selling proposition, what we call the USP, really deals with this core question. And it's designed to be a simple, clear, and concise statement that should be part of any sales rep's arsenal. This is a statement that you should have in your back pocket because you never know when it's going to come up. An elevator conversation with an unexpected prospect, a formal sales presentation in which you want to certainly indicate why that customer should do business with you and what makes you better. There could be so many situations, a prospecting call, there could be so many situations where that question is going to come up. Why should I do business with you? What makes you different? So that's something that you need to have at the ready. It's also what we call the elevator pitch. So it's a short, concise, 1 or 2 sentence statement that basically addresses this key question. And so what you're doing really is offering a reason to the customer of why your solution or company is both different and better than the competition's. And we'll be talking more in this chapter and later in the course on creating that value proposition, as it were. Channel members are critical, I should say, to a producer's product distribution strategy, as they perform a lot of vital tasks. And it's important for us as salespeople to understand that. Think of it. Think of why any manufacturer, any producer would have a chain of wholesalers or distributors or retailers selling their product, simply because this distribution chain has the resources to perform some very important functions for that manufacturer that they either can't do, don't have the manpower, or resources to do themselves. And they perform very vital tasks like stocking product, selling it, servicing the products, taking it back on warranty, providing customer purchase returns and allowances. All of these things are vital tasks that can be performed by the distribution channel. So to aid channel members like wholesalers, distributors, and retailers in selling products, a lot of manufacturers offer assistance in terms of cooperative advertising, sales promotion, and pricing allowances. Salespeople should be able to discuss price, discounts, payment terms, and credit policies frequently and confidently with their customers. You know, if there's any questions that get asked, and get asked a lot, are questions like, what's your price? Are there any discounts? If I prepay, do you give me some kind of allowance? Are there any volume discounts? All of these things can impact the overall price of the solution, which is very important. And these are not things that you want to have to go back and say, well, you know what, I'm not sure, I'm going to go check on this. Because the minute you do that, you can lose the momentum of that entire sales motion and ultimately may lose the potential sale. So this is the type of information you need to have studied and have at the ready so you can keep that momentum going. Success in sales involves knowledge of many different technologies to properly service customers. So having a good understanding of the tools that your company uses to track sales opportunities, track the sales funnel, to be able to reach out to customers, CRM tools are all vital to sales success. This brings us to the conclusion of the overview of Module 2. At this point, I'd like to summarize the readings and assignments related to this module. As far as readings go, from your text, please read chapters 3, 4, and 5. I'd encourage you, but it's not mandatory, to look at the supplementary readings associated with this module. One is entitled The Sales Playbook. It's an item by In the Funnel Sales Consulting, and there's an associated video that goes with it on the Sales Playbook, also by In the Funnel Sales Consulting. I would like you to view the PowerPoints that are related to chapters 3, 4, and 5 from your text. As far as assignments go, please look at the video exercise entitled Listening Equals Customer Acquisition and Sales. It's related to chapter 4 and it's worth 3% of your grade. So you want to look at the video exercise, answer the questions, and submit your response as per the calendar due date that's in your course calendar. There's a case study also associated with this module. It's 3.2 called Superior Office Furniture. It's related to chapter 3 in your text and it's worth 5% of your grade. And again, you want to view the case study, answer the associated questions, and submit them per the due date in your course calendar.